All right. Good morning, everybody. Uh, Happy Wednesday to you. My name is Lupin Reppert. I'm the executive director here at CalSAC, the California School Age Consortium, also the host of the California After School and Summer Challenge. So excited to be here with you and be with our partners to talk about the May Revise. We'll jump right in because there's a lot of information to talk about. So really happy to pass the mic to two very helpful, supportive, wonderful partners, both from Partnership and for Children and Youth, as well as CA3, the California After School Advocacy Alliance. So I'll pass it over to Ben, who is one of our speakers today.
Thank you, Lupin. Can y'all hear me okay? Okay, cool. Good morning, y'all. Good to see you. Super excited to spend the next hour or so talking about changes to the state budget and a little bit of how the state budget gets made, answer your questions, and engage with you all as we all seek to serve our students in California better. Plenty of time for questions. If you have them as we're talking throughout, please feel free to put them in the chat and then we'll grab them throughout the presentation closer to the end. Also super excited to have Christina Marcellus from Capital Advisors join us a little bit later for a special guest session. Christina is a K-12 education policy expert, so very excited to hear her perspectives on state policy this year and beyond. Also, my colleague Jen Dietrich is going to dig deep, as Jen also is a budget expert on what's happening this year in K-12 policy land. So before we get into those fun topics, want to talk a little bit about today's objectives. So we hope that by the end of today, you'll have a better understanding of the state budget process, including the timelines and the rules for making the budget. We hope you also will learn the actions that CA3, the California After School Advocacy Alliance, is taking this year. And then finally, hope that you have some actions that you can take back to your communities and your programs. So first, let's do a little bit of a warm up. So go ahead and raise your hand either in the use an emoji in Zoom, or you can just actually raise your hand if you're kind enough to show your face and be on screen with us today. Raise your hand if you represent a community-based organization or a nonprofit, or put in the chat. Either way. Awesome. See some thumbs up. That's the case for me too. Just raise my hand there. Okay. Okay, I see some others. Linda. Okay, very cool. See a heart from Christina. Cool. Raise your hand if you represent a school district, charter school, or county office of education, LEAs, as we call them. Okay, awesome. Laura, I see you. Maria, I see you. Thanks, y'all. Okay, so we got some school districts, we got some CBOs. Raise your hand or put an emoji if you're new to expanded learning, if you're 2 years or less in. I'm just on the other side of this, so I'm not calling myself a rookie anymore. Okay, I see some hands. Okay, what if you're an expanded learning veteran? Anyone 10 years in or more? And Laura, veteran, Lupin, vet. Very nice. Jen, where's yours? I know you are. Awesome, awesome. Okay, y'all. Who works with elementary youth? Who are our younger providers? Did I see you? Very cool. What about our middle schools? Any middle school experts here? If LA Conservation Corps is, I know they are middle school experts down in LA. Not sure if anyone from LA Conservation is here. Okay, what about high school youth? Who works with high school youth? Seen any for high school? Maybe we're shy, or maybe we just have a younger crowd here. Okay, now into the important stuff. Raise your hand or put a thumb up if you like pineapple on your pizza. No judgment, judgment-free zone. Nice, Lupin. I see you. Maria, I see you. Very cool. Okay, we got some pineapple haters. It seems most of our group's pineapple haters. Okay, now we'll end with the most important question that I have. Raise your hand if you hang toilet paper the right way, which is the over variety rather than the under variety. I know there's some things about cats and it's easier for them to roll it down when it's over. I don't care about any of that. There's a right way to put your toilet paper. Let me see your hands. There we go. Okay, now we're getting some engagement. So it just took a while for us to warm up. We had to get to the important stuff. I see. Okay, so we feel strong about the toilet paper. Good. All right. Okay, now we can keep moving now that we've established that. Thank you. Okay. So before we dive in, I want to do a little bit of a trivia round. So Lupin, if you are armed and ready with the polls, we have 3 questions for you all to start thinking, generating those ideas, getting warmed up for some budget discussion. So Lupin's going to open up the poll. First question is, which date is the deadline for the state legislature to pass the state budget every year? So it's one date every year that is constitutionally required for the state legislature to pass the budget onto the governor. Who knows what that date is? And if you know, go ahead and fill out that poll there. We will give you 10 more seconds. What is the date for the state budget to get passed? The state budget bill to get passed every year. Okay, 5, 4, last chance to answer. 3, 2, 1. Let's go ahead and close. And let's share those results. Okay, I can't see them, but I think you all can. Looks like the majority of folks said June 15th. We also got some May 31st, but majority was June 15th. Let's see. Indeed, June 15th. Very nicely done, y'all. Okay, let's go to the next question. What is Proposition 98? Prop 98 in Ed Policy land. Is it a fun 90s theme bar? Is it an agreement between Oregon and California to immediately share evidence of Bigfoot sightings? Could be. Is it a minimum guarantee for transportation funding in California? Or a minimum guarantee for funding for K-12 schools and community colleges? What say you, may revise attendees? Okay, last chance to vote. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Let's close it out. Indeed, minimum guarantee for K-12 education funding, Prop 98. Very nicely done. Okay. Last question. Importantly, what is Jen's dog's name? What is my dog's name? Sam and Frodo? Bailey and Taco? Salsa and Peanut? Or Miss Peaches and Mr. Ruffus? If you know, you know. And if you don't, you'll learn. 10 seconds. What do you think our dogs' names are? The first one's Jen's. The second one past the slash is mine. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Nicely done. 3 for 3. Bailey and Taco. Should have put a picture in here. Should have put a picture. You have to follow up afterwards if you want pictures of Bailey and Taco. Okay. Thank you all for indulging me on that. Let's close those out. Thank you very much. Lupin. Today's agenda, we're going to start with a little introduction warm-up as we just did. Then we're going to get into the overview of the state budget, which I'm about to launch into. We'll then talk about the state of the state budget. That's Jen. Then we're going to talk about what does budget advocacy look like, Christina. And then we'll get into a little bit of a Q&A and share some resources and evaluation for you all. So that's our plan today. Again, put questions in the chat as you have them, but we're going to dive right in. I want to share this quote with you. The state budget process can be really complicated, right? The timelines, the deadlines, the political maneuvers, it all can be a little heady, but at its core, the state budget is a reflection of our values. It says what we want to prioritize What the governor proposes to fund or to cut, to create or to dissolve is a statement about what we find important in California, or at least it should be. So with that framing set, let's look at this very complicated budget process and talk a little bit about the timelines and the major players. So the budget fiscal year starts on July 1st every year. During the summer and fall period, state departments develop their baseline budgets and submit those to the Department of Finance. Baseline budgets are the minimum operating budgets that state departments need to continue their operations and fund what they had previously funded. Department of Finance reviews those and presents those budgets to the governor, who then proposes and prepares a budget for the following January, for the following fiscal year. By January 10th of every year, the governor must release his proposed budget for the upcoming fiscal year. Those budget proposals in January are based on the estimated revenues and spending projections in the state. California, as we all know, has a massive economy, nearly $4 trillion as of 2023, larger than all but 4 countries on Earth. California it's hard to comprehend how big the California economy is, and thus our budget is massive in terms of how much money we spend on programs and how much revenue the state receives every year. The Department of Finance base those estimates on how much revenue it expects the state to receive. Importantly, the California budget has to be balanced. Unlike the federal government that can print its own revenue, right, and create larger debts, California can't do that. Our spending has to match what our income has to match our outgo, right? So the governor's spending plan it cannot exceed, it must meet or be lower than the estimated revenues it expects the state to receive. So between January and May, after the governor releases his proposed budget for the upcoming fiscal year, the Legislative Analyst Office, also known as the LAO, which provides policy and budget research and counsel to the legislature, LAO provides an overview of the governor's proposals, and the legislature then convenes dozens of hearings to review those proposals in depth. The legislature has the Assembly and the Senate, the 2 houses, and each of those houses has subcommittees based on the departments across the legislature, across the state. So in the Assembly, the budget subcommittee is the 3rd one, known as Sub 3, and that handles education financing. On the Senate side, it's Sub 1, budget Sub 1, education finance. So there are dozens of hearings throughout the last several months that we've just had between January and May to review the proposals in depth on the governor's budget. Different speakers, different legislative leaders have different ways of organizing these hearings. Some speakers empower subcommittee chairs a little bit more. Some want more of a hand in the process, but regardless, subcommittees meet to break down this process. So then by May 14th, the governor releases an updated budget proposal known as the May Revise or May Revision. And these changes to the state budget proposals are based on updated economic and revenue outlook. So between January and May, one important thing that the state starts receiving is updates on tax revenue, right? So May Revise reflects updates on what we're expecting the next fiscal outlook to look like, and Jen will talk a little bit more about what we saw this year. After that, Assembly and state leaders reach a unified legislative budget package, which then gets delivered to the governor. And the legislature must pass a final version of the Budget Act by midnight on June 15th, as we saw a second ago. And then for the next 2 weeks throughout June, for the remainder of June, the governor and legislative leaders continue to negotiate the budget package. Once a deal is reached, the governor signs the Budget Act, and then throughout the rest of the summer, what are known as budget trailer bills. These are the technical changes to the budget that create the policy changes for the new budget proposals to be enacted. These are then passed and signed by the governor throughout the rest of the summer and fall. There's what's known as budget cleanup, also that are smaller error correcting changes once the legislature returns from their summer recess. But by the fall, the governor has, usually by September, sometimes October, the governor has signed all of the revisions to the budget and the whole process starts again. So it begins in July. We get estimated revenues. State departments set their budgets. The governor proposes a budget plan in January. The legislature meets to review the proposals, and then they sign the trailer bills, and then the whole process starts again every year. So it does get very complicated, gets very in the weeds, but there are plenty of ways for us to engage in the process, to learn more and learn what's important for our communities, to know about what the changes that legislative leaders and the governor are proposing. So with that said, I will pass it to Jen to give us a little bit of an update on what we're looking at this year in terms of the state budget proposals.
All right, thank you, Ben, for setting us up. So we're going to dive into what we're seeing right now and how it compares to what was released in January. So overall, a lot of money coming into California, but it's not meeting the projections that we had hoped for. So there is a deficit. The state has already taken some early budget action to address some of the deficit, but there's still some remaining. We are going to focus on Proposition 98. I really like that theme for a bar, but that's really where education funding is, and that'll help kind of focus our conversation. So going to the next slide. In the governor's press conference in May, talked a lot about, what he was proposing. Didn't say a whole lot about education, but he did say this. Doesn't want to see education cuts. Right now, I want to see us preserve the progress we have made on community schools, on preschool, on after school for all, summer school. Governor Newsom wants to keep that commitment. So, since January and through all these conversations, they have signaled that they are committed to many of these huge investments and historic commitments that they've made over the years. And we were excited to see expanded learning as part of one of those key core educational programs that is intended to be protected. So at this point, we do not see any proposed cuts to ELOP funding. We are still confirming and tracking a few issues, and we have a few recommendations that we'd like to highlight, for the legislature to help strengthen proposals. And the big headline is, if ELOP isn't cut, there isn't the urgent action to reach out to legislators right now. They are getting so many calls and meeting requests to have conversations about those programs that are proposed to be cut. So if we're kind of flying under the radar, we're just gonna, hold it in, say thank you, give our suggestions, but it isn't a massive push that we've had to do in previous years around final budget discussion. So going to the next page. Okay, so focusing on ELOP, the Expanded Learning Opportunities Program, the $4 billion in ongoing funding is included in the proposal. We'll talk about attendance recovery shortly, but one of the changes proposed to ELOP is to allow ELOP funding to be used for an attendance recovery component, after school, on the weekends, whatever. We'll talk about that shortly, but that is a change to clarify that it can be used for those purposes. We also see a proposal that would require school districts and charters to spend all of the money that they've received for ELOP from the 2022 and the 2023 fiscal years, All of that needs to be spent by September 30th of this year, or it will go back to the state. And then starting with 23-24, that it will continue as, you know, you get the money in this fiscal year, you have this fiscal year to spend it. You also have the next fiscal year to spend it. If you do not spend that money within those 2 years, that would revert back to the state. Additionally, starting in 25-26, they would require school districts and charters to each year declare their operational intent to run ELOP. So we've been trying to look for examples of what operational intent looks like. We haven't found one yet, you know, that's been introduced in a program. Our understanding is that somewhere that the school districts and the charters will have to say, yes, we are going to run ELOP this year. Or if they don't, they can lose all their remaining funding. We have some questions about, you know, does that look like a form? Does that look like something including in an LCAP or on a website? We don't know what that looks like yet. That's one of our questions. We are submitting for more info. Okay, going to the next slide. So with these proposed changes to the policy of ELOP, I think we see it as more incentive for districts and charters to spend their ELOP funding in a reasonable timeline. We know that, you know, ELOP started back in 21. There weren't requirements to spend all of your money out right away. There wasn't an audit required. Folks had time to build their programs. However, there is concern that not enough of the funding is being utilized right now. And so this signals to us the legislature and the governor's intent to make good on that money, to use it to the best of our abilities and not sit on it, or lose your money, give it to somebody else who may need it. So right now, it doesn't clarify where the reverted funds would go. So say a district doesn't use all their funds for a year, it goes back to the state. We're not sure where it would go. It could be for Prop 98 in general. They could try to just scoop it into a big block of reverted funding that could, you know, fill holes other places in the budget. But our thinking is, you know, if a district doesn't spend their ELOP dollars, let's look at the districts who are only receiving $50,000 a year. Let's look at the districts, the tier 2 districts who are, you know, have that variable funding and it's less than tier 1 districts. How can we keep that ELOP dollars in the system to serve where it is needed? And then secondly, yeah, of course, how can we see districts declare their intent to run this? Where would that show up? When would it show up? So that we can just get a better understanding of people are going to use this money or they're not. Okay, so that's ELOP. If you go to the next slide. Okay, so about attendance recovery. If this concept is new, our understanding is that these are programs that can be run outside of the traditional school day. However, they need to be substantially equivalent to what is taught during the school day in content, in quality. It's basically adding some instructional minutes for students who have missed school. And there are limits on how much makeup of attendance that students can make. We know that Saturday schools already do some of this where they allow students to make up attendance. Schools can get some of their attendance-based money back, but it doesn't affect chronic absenteeism rates. So there's a lot of focus on kids missing school and also concern about that funding not being there for the school as it has been in the past. And so this proposal would allow school districts the choice to run attendance recovery attendance recovery programs. They can use ELOP dollars for that. And that would be to, recoup the funding and provide more instructional minutes. We understand also that the attendance recovery, in order to qualify for getting that, those minutes back, they need to be under the immediate supervision and control of a certificated employee. Earlier in the year, we saw this defined as a certificated teacher. But in the May revision, we've seen the definition broaden a bit to say, okay, certificated employees of the school district can help administer these programs. They also gave some examples of, what could attendance recovery look like as a component of expanded learning. It could look like, one-on-one or small group tutoring, again, but with a certificated employee supervising. It also allows school districts to track attendance in 15-minute increments, which is a lot. It's not built into the system yet, and we've heard some concerns about how that may be challenging for folks, especially at the beginning. But that's another difference between Saturday school, where it's like a full day of schooling, versus 15 minutes here, 15 minutes there for attendance recovery. So going to the next slide, we have some questions, but we appreciate the intent. We want the state to better address why students are missing school and how we can help them catch up, and how can schools get some of that funding back that's so critical. We support the intent, and we appreciate the recognition that learning does happen outside of the classroom. We've been saying that for years, so we appreciate this. There was a lot of questions about implementation. How do we figure out the logistics of running these programs if we need teachers after school? How are we going to do it in 15-minute increments? There's a lot of questions in that. And so the May proposal gives districts a year before they can start operating these. So instead of having this kick off potentially in July 2024, school districts wouldn't be allowed to run them until July 1st, 2025. And at that time, CDE would be required to provide guidance on how attendance recovery programs can be run in conjunction with expanded learning programs. So it's not separate. So we are grateful for the additional time to understand how that can work, and working with stakeholders to make it as easy as possible. They also want school districts to be innovative and strategic. So we really hope that guidance and this additional time will bring some creative ideas on how to get students that learning back, but also provide it in a space that helps encourage kids to come. So if it's just like an extra hour after school and kids are missing school, don't know how successful it would be to keep students there if it's very similar to the setup. Okay. On from attendance recovery, and we can address some of these questions that have popped up. The one other thing about attendance recovery, we know that there are a number of community partners who already help with tutoring. And I think our recommendation would be, are there other creative ways in which community partners can help support these attendance recovery programs? If it's under the supervision of a teacher and there's, other certificated employees to help, can community partners also be on staff to help run these? Just given staffing concerns everywhere in education, we would think that would be helpful. Okay, sorry, going away from attendance recovery, there is some funding proposed for ACES and 21st century programs. We need to confirm it, but our guess is that it would be roughly enough to maintain current daily rates at $10.18 per day. We are going to confirm that, but that's what it looks like for now. So it would remain the same. Okay, going to the next slide. Okay, this is where it gets a little interesting and over my head. There are some financial maneuvers and, you know, financial switching around to try to prevent more cuts to Prop 98 to schools. The state does not want to cut what we are building and all that's invested in education, but so they have these creative fixes, and some folks are really against a creative fix that they're proposing. We see CTA, California Teachers Association, we see the School Board Association have concerns about this financial fix. It wouldn't take funding away from folks and try to bring it back to the state, but it would do some accounting maneuvers to say, hey, revenues weren't what we thought they were going to be last year, so like let's edit that. And moving forward, we have a better kind of baseline for funding. But yes, that there are concerns about this. The Legislative Analyst's Office also has a thing. I don't think you need to know the details of how this works, but it's important to remember that if this maneuver, this specific one, if it does not happen, they will need to be creative in cutting more or providing deferrals, other things that they would have to do in education to get creative in order to balance the budget. But at this point, this is their proposal, and we will continue to watch it as they continue to negotiate. Okay. And then going to my last slide, this isn't discussed in the budget, but if we are able to fly under the budget and not be cut, you know, other than making some changes to the policy and administration of ELOP, there is a lot of conversation about unspent funding. And the state will see data later this fall, and they're starting to see some now to understand what districts have spent and what they have not. And there's a lot of, we've heard from some school districts and partners that they're nervous about spending their ELOP funding. They don't know if it's going to be there in the future. They don't know, you know, how to make this all work, or they're having staffing challenges, whatever it is. People are going to continue to focus on unspent funding and will likely come after it to scoop the savings in future years. So we really want to just flag it for you as potential local action in your own community. You know, how are you spending the funding? What do you think is remaining? How would you recommend that funding be used? It's just want to give you like the warning that this will come back and it will be some tough questions. And we are going to try and get creative in how we can urge everyone to spend those funds and invest them for what they were for. Okay, so that's the budget overview for right now. I will read through the questions and address many of these shortly, but at this point we can kick it over to Ben.
Cool. Thanks, Jen. Yeah, lots of good questions in the chat. We'll leave some time in Q&A to talk about those, but and keep them coming if you have them in the chat. But in the meantime, I want to pass it to our special guest, Christina Marcellus, who's going to walk us through a little bit on her perspectives of budget advocacy, maybe what she's seeing this year in budget landscape, and how we can get involved and be better policy advocates for our kids and communities. So with that, I will open it up to Christina, and let me stop sharing my screen.
Yeah, take that picture down. Oh my gosh, horrifying. Hi, everybody. Compared to you and Jen, you're like outside and you're happy, and I'm like in a studio like I'm a high school senior. Anywho, hi, folks. This is super important to be talking about this. So thanks, everyone, for bringing us together. My name's Christina. I work at Capital Advisors in Sacramento. And while the bulk of our clientele is K-12 school districts, county offices of education, education associations, I also work really closely with the California State Alliance of YMCAs. So I've, over the years, gotten a pretty good pulse on what's going on, especially as we roll out ELOP from both of those perspectives. Ben and Jen did an amazing job setting the scene. I'm just going to add a couple more points, and then I'll wrap up to maybe give some time for verbal Q&A. So broadly, budget advocacy. It's not just when any of us are building our budget and we have a line item for entertainment and we have a line item for our rent and mortgage and we want to make sure the numbers balance. It's that plus all of those changes that Jen just walked you through, and going back a few years, even the inception of ELOP, that was technically done through budget conversations. Ordinarily, when you think of making a new policy, you think of running a bill. You think AB1 is going to cruise through the legislature and it's going to, when it's signed into law, establish ELOP. That is a pretty clear process with very clear junctures for advocates, thought partners, stakeholders to engage. You follow the committee timeline, you give your comments, and you engage with members of the committee, and it's pretty clear and concise. The budget conversations have started to envelop so much more than just actually the budgeted numbers. So folks like Jen and Ben have a really complicated job now because they're also tracking policy vehicles, the Maritsuchi bill on tier 2, other bills that would impact expanded learning and the work that you guys are all doing. Those are still going, but the budget is different, especially this year, because we have built our budget without clear numbers of our tax revenue. Remember when we moved our tax deadline until October? That is what resulted in that maneuver that Jen referenced that folks in the education advocacy community are very, very concerned about. Yes, the governor's maneuver would not result in any quote unquote cuts to TK through 14 education funding. What folks are saying though is essentially what the governor is proposing is to keep the 22-23 Prop 98 amount where it was, not pulling any money back from the field, but not counting all of that as Prop 98, counting some of it as just kind of a loan from the state general fund. Why is that important? Because the makers of Prop 98 and all of their wisdom set up 3 tests. 2 of them are based on what Prop 98 got the year prior. So if you do the governor's maneuver and you keep the number the same, but you don't count all of it as Prop 98, that doesn't get built into the Prop 98 guarantee for future years. So folks are saying, if you short us, it's going to have an impact on the money we could and should be receiving for K-14 public education. The wild thing is that this massive negotiation is going to have to wrap up within a month. Budget timelines are wild. The governor gives us January proposal, and then we get May. And within 4 weeks, as Ben kicked us off with our trivia, the legislature has to pass a balanced budget to the governor, who has some time to sign it. For our purposes here, for CBOs working closely with school districts, there is a likelihood, almost a guarantee, that whatever is signed in that budget bill is going to impact school operations that next school year. So there is no such thing as a summer break. You're reading through trailer bill language, you're waiting for cleanup, and things change. I mean, you can kind of get a sense through budget advocacy negotiations of like, clearly the governor is not going to pull an about face on universal school meals, on universal after school, on universal pre-K. Those are foundational to his legacy. And like none of us are going, oh, he's just going to strike ELOP and then free up $4 billion in funding. That's not going to happen. But changes like the ones Jen just walked you through, those can change very quickly between May and final budget. And we all need to help keep each other apprised of what we're hearing, what we're learning, and where the pressure points are. Okay, so that's my soapbox on how budget advocacy is more than budget advocacy. The other thing at play here, when you're talking specifically about things like ELOP and ACES, is that they are part of the Prop 98 guarantee, which is a floor for public education. No other area of the budget has that constitutional protected minimum funding. So when things get really bad up here, which we haven't had to deal with for several years because during the pandemic, revenues they went way up, and we could all engage in a thoughtful discussion of should we have rolled out as much as we did when the revenues were high? My argument is yes. You take those opportunities to make these transformative changes, but now things are coming back down to reality a little bit more. And while it's not looking like super great for TK-14 education, climate, health and human services, transportation, they are getting slashed. We, in the K-12 space and related after school areas, we've got that floor. You can't go beneath that floor without a very, very politically unfavorable maneuver in the legislature called suspension. And nobody wants to do that. The governor said, Jen just pulled up that soundbite. The governor is not interested in that. So that's setting the stage a little bit. Now, I have 3 minutes. I think a lot of when folks are new to Sacramento statewide advocacy, just the sheer scope of it can be overwhelming. Our Prop 98 guarantee, just the money we send out the door for TK through community college education, is bigger than like 20 state budgets. The scope is really hard to get your head around, and as a result, it feels a lot like when you want to have a successful Sacramento advocacy initiative, you need to match that scope with manpower, with numbers, with think of the last time you felt like you were really a part of something that moved the needle on your cause. I would guess it was as part of a coalition, bringing a whole bunch of people together, a march, a rally, a lobby day, a sustained social media effort, and you felt part of something big. And that's important for a lot of reasons. You got to convince the majority of 120 legislators that they're not the only one hearing from people. So that's one thing, just the scope and the organizational need of moving an issue in Sacramento. It takes a long, long time. Then you put yourself in the shoes of a district superintendent or a member of their cabinet. I see some school districts on the call today. They're looking at all that stuff and saying, okay, take that out of it. Get surgical with me, get very specific, tell me what I need to know to keep serving my students well and to be compliant with the law. So I would just say for anyone here, shifting your narrative and shifting your approach from the statewide level to the local level is super important. You want to rally up here to get the job done. And you need to you need to be a thought partner locally so that you are helping your district partners and the districts on the call. I would welcome your thoughts on this. Help them do the job well, help them do it right, and help them with what they need to know. Because districts right now are accounting for declining enrollment, the suite of universals that we've just rolled out, perhaps local labor issues, facility needs, teacher vacancies, broader workforce shortages. It is overwhelming. And if you can get your pitch real clean on how you can help, it goes leaps and bounds. So I think I'm now at time. That's my spiel. I will stay to answer questions. If you want to dig into anything I mentioned, I'd love to. Kim says, focus on the how. Yeah, how are we going to get this done? Versus up here, it's why do we need to get this done? We are building something or we are maintaining something in Sacramento. Locally, it's we got to do this right. And we probably have, 2 months to figure it out. Okay, that's it for me. Thanks for giving me some time.
Amen. No, thanks, Christina. Yeah, please hang on for Q&A. Okay, folks, let's give ourselves 8 minutes before we wrap up here. Have a few things at the end, but let's open Q&A for 8 minutes. And then if you have them for me, for Jen, for Christina, just start throwing them out. I saw one earlier in the chat from Steve. Do we know how much of the ELOP funding is being used? And Jen talked about that a little bit. And would we know if some districts are using funds in ways that would not fall under the definition of expanded learning? And I'm not entirely sure if the audit results, for example, would tell us that. I'm seeing some head shakes. Jen, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, our thought is that what we've heard is that districts are going to need to report their expenditure, so how much money they've spent and how much is left, but we don't think they have to tell the state what it was used for. So, you know, there is the local auditing that asks a lot of questions, but auditing information doesn't go to the state to like bunch all together and report out to us unless there's like a flag or an issue. That's the only time it gets transferred to the state. So we're very interested in seeing what unspent funding looks like, but I do think we will not see all the different uses of it. But we have heard about some creativity and some, yeah, beyond stretching of those dollars.
I see another one. Go ahead, Jen.
I was just going to say, I saw another question about attendance recovery and what portion. So after school, a teacher, a certificated employee has to supervise the attendance recovery portion. But if students after that go to enrichment or sports or whatever it is, that does not have to be run by a certificated employee. Just the portion of after school programming that focuses on attendance recovery.
Is that supervised or provided by?
It looks like it's under the immediate supervision. And so we've heard that that'll be pretty stiff. But I think we can definitely make the case that there are a number of community partners that already support tutoring in some way. And we would advocate for a little more flexibility if possible. Yeah, Christina, do you have other thoughts on that one?
Well, isn't that, I thought the tutoring piece was new for the May revision. Is that right? Yeah. I think it's something, I would also say that the legislature, Jen and Ben, I would be interested in your take on this. They seem skeptical of this one, at least some of the voices that we've been hearing from. This is, when the governor rolled this out, he rolled it out as part of a package. There's attendance recovery, and then there's this other thing called instructional continuity, which is they're kind of revamping independent study. I think a lot of policymakers can kind of get their heads around instructional continuity. So if a school is closed because of a wildfire or a student is absent for a long term because of a medical need, let's find a way to at least offer them a way to not have, you know, weeks and weeks or a month of learning loss. You can get your head around that. Like what Jen said, I think there is some skepticism that if a kid's not coming to school, is offering them more school time the best way around it. But we do have this tremendous decline in enrollment needs, so the governor feels like he has to do something about it. My crystal ball, which has been wrong a lot before, is that we either see this get signed with major changes or it doesn't go. Maybe this is just one of the things that they are going to negotiate kind of themselves in circles around, and it doesn't wind up making it because a lot of people have a lot more questions. I mean, considering the implications for certificated employees, I don't know where CTA and CFT are on this. Have you guys heard? I mean, they're going to be a huge voice in that negotiation. I don't know if they're thumbs up, thumbs down, like whatever. We got bigger fish to fry. We're worried about this maneuver. I'm not sure, but I would be really interested in where organized labor is on that.
Yeah, we've been wondering for months where CTA is on the attendance recovery and haven't heard from them. I don't think they have an official position. Okay. And to your point, Christina, in hearings on attendance recovery, I know Senator Laird, for instance, who chairs the budget subcommittee on education on the Senate side, had a lot of questions about how the attendance recovery proposal was addressing chronic absenteeism that, legislators are rightfully trying to address in the state. And, folks didn't have a good answer for how this proposal was doing that. So I'm not surprised that implementation is being delayed, and who knows where it'll be next year. Yeah, Laura.
Yeah, so I mean, we do attendance recovery, we do Saturday school, and the problem is the students that are chronically absent aren't the ones that are coming. It's the students that come all the time and come, and it's like, yay, free, we're gonna have this fun day. The other issue with that is for us as a rate 2 district with our ELOP funds, yes, attendance recovery has to be done with a certificated teacher, which is at a per diem rate, right? So even though they're doing those instructional minutes, and that does have to be done by a certificated teacher, and our Saturday school, I believe, is oversaw by someone with an administrative credential. So like the funds don't really capture that. And I mean, of course we could use the ELOP funds to run that like 3-hour expansion if we were going to do a full 9-hour day. But also at the same point here at our district, none of the teachers or the staff want to work on site for a 9-hour day. So it's easier for us to utilize our funds to subcontract with the CBO to run like a summer camp or something like that. So there's just like not enough money in it, and it doesn't really hit the core issue of our students who are chronically absent.
Thanks, Laura. And I also, saw your comment in the chat about the tier 2 rate reduction. We definitely heard from other districts that was a frustrating shock so close to, planning and running programs. So if you aren't familiar, Christina mentioned it a bit ago, AB 2112 by Senator Murasucci is trying to address this issue and hold tier 2 districts at their funding levels for 2022-2023 school year, I believe. Yeah. So anyway, that is a potential fix that the legislature is considering, but definitely on our radars. Okay, sorry, y'all. I know we could keep talking for a long time about this, but we do have to wrap up. So I'm going to pass it to Lupin, reshare my screen, and then Jen and I will drop our emails in the chat. This is what we do. We're always happy to talk about budget advocacy. And if you have questions, we are here to help you. So I'll put our emails in the chat, and feel free to reach out anytime. Pass it to you, Lupin.
Great, thank you. So first of all, big thank you to Ben, Jen, and Christina for sharing your time and your wisdom with all of us, and for all the work you do every day to help really move this really important work for young people. You see email addresses of Jen and Ben there. They both work at Partnership for Children and Youth, as well as the California After School and Advocacy Alliance, of which CalSAC is also a member. One of the things that was coming to mind for me, actually, as Christina, as you were naming, you were saying like, you want to feel like you're in it and you're rallying and you're on the steps and you're making stuff happen and you're part of a coalition. And my thought was, what a perfect segue into what we have on this take action slide. So I'm going to skip over the first one for a second and just say, great, you want to be in it on the Capitol steps, advocating, talking to legislators at the state Capitol. The challenge is the place to go for that. That's where statewide we come together, OST providers, youth, parents all come together to talk about the impact of OST and why it's so important and why we need to protect things like ELOP, as well as raise up some of the issues that are happening on the ground. Joining CA3 is another great way to have your kind of a pulse on what's happening in the legislature, as well as have influence over that. It's a statewide coalition that's working together to really move the best interests of OST and expanded learning forward. Another great opportunity is something called TACA, Teens Advocating for Civic Action, which has been a program that's been running for a number of years, and we just got some legs under it. So we have curriculum that we're moving now and really kind of shifting our focus to support adult leaders who are then implementing that curriculum with young people who often then come to the challenge as a culminating event. So just elevating that, and I put put in the chat a little bit more information about that. We are trying to get a sense of who's interested in this program in the next month or so. With the expectation that it's gonna move starting in September. So please reach out if you're interested. That'll help us with planning and help us make sure we can offer that. And then the last thing that Christina talked about is going local. That local work is really important as well. And that first thing at the top, the start planning area, is two perfect examples of how you can localize your advocacy efforts as well. So inviting a legislator to come to a site is a killer way to do that. And just as a note, there is a recording of a webinar that probably been in Gen led, or at least one of them, around how to plan a site visit. And there are also great resources to support you in doing that. And then there's also Lights On After School, which is a national effort to really celebrate after school OST. That is also an opportunity to have a local event that legislators could come to, community members could come to, etc. Thank you again, everyone, for being here, and keep on keeping on. We look forward to connecting back with you as we start to move towards 2025. Bye, everybody.
Thanks, y'all.